Ethan had always thought of himself as a patient man, which was convenient, because life had a way of testing patience like a cosmic lab experiment. That evening, the rain was hammering against the floor-to-ceiling windows of his apartment, turning the neon cityscape into a blur of lights smeared across the streets like wet paint. He was curled up on his couch, a half-eaten bowl of noodles in his lap, arguing with his smart assistant about the proper way to make a cup of tea. "No, Tev, I do not want lavender. I want chamomile," he said, watching as the AI's robotic arm tilted a mug and somehow spilled water all over the counter. "Great, now it's soup," he muttered, grabbing a towel. The knock at the door came just as he was wrestling with the towel, and it sounded almost polite, just enough to suggest civility, though the rhythmic tap-tap-tap had the urgency of someone being chased by a swarm of genetically engineered mosquitoes. Ethan froze. Guests at this hour were rare, unexpected guests even rarer. He wiped his hands on a dishcloth and approached cautiously, peeking through the peephole. She was standing there, drenched, with long hair plastered to her face, and a coat that glistened as if the rain itself was trying to seduce the fabric. She looked human, and yet the ears, those impossibly long, delicate, slightly translucent ears, gave her away. He blinked. Hello," he said, as if that single word could somehow explain his entire confusion. "Please," she said, voice melodic with a slight, unplaceable accent, "I need shelter." She smiled, and it was disarmingly warm. Ethan's instincts screamed caution, but the combination of rain, charm, and the unmistakable aura of someone utterly lost triggered something in him. He opened the door wider. "Okay, come in. But careful the floor." He stopped mid-sentence as she slid inside, leaving wet footprints on the synthetic carpet. She didn't seem to notice, or perhaps she didn't care. "I'm Lyra," she said, glancing around as though scanning for hazards, or perhaps appreciating the oddities of human interiors. She dropped her coat with a soft thud and shook herself like a dog, sending droplets flying, narrowly missing his holographic bookshelf. Ethan coughed and waved his hands. "Yeah, hi, I'm Ethan. You probably want a towel." Lyra tilted her head, those long ears twitching in the process. "Towel? For what?" she asked, voice tinged with curiosity and a faint purr of amusement. Ethan stared. "For drying off, you're soaked." Her reaction was unexpected. "I do not mind water," she said, her eyes brightening as she looked at the puddles forming around her feet. "It excites my senses." Ethan's mind went blank. He stumbled over a chair, pretending he meant to sit but mostly trying to hide the sudden, unexplainable thump in his chest. "Excites senses. That's good." As Lyra explored the apartment, she discovered his kitchen, his books, and his holographic chessboard, each interaction a mixture of fascination and inadvertent chaos. She leaned toward the blender, pressed a button, and a soft beam of light shot out, activating a holographic display. "Communicator?" she asked. Ethan blinked, realizing she had mistaken his blender for a sophisticated device capable of interstellar signaling. Yeah, sure, communicator." "Totally," he said, hands raised in mock surrender. Lyra chuckled, a sound that reminded him of wind chimes caught in a soft storm, and turned to examine his teapot. She sniffed it, tapped it with a long, delicate finger, and muttered something that sounded like a mixture of poetry and chemical analysis. Ethan, who had been trying to figure out if he could safely retrieve his laundry from the bathroom without making eye contact, whispered to himself, "I need a drink." She wandered closer to the living room, tilting her head at his holo TV displaying a sitcom, and her ears twitched so fast it almost seemed like a signal flare. "Your entertainment is peculiar," she said. Ethan shrugged. "It's called humor, mostly involuntary human suffering." She laughed, the sound delicate yet resonant, and suddenly, despite everything, the chaos, the rain, the strange tingle in the air, he felt lighter. Then, without warning, she lunged forward to inspect his couch cushions, narrowly missing his leg. "Cushions. Interesting. Soft yet structured," she declared, and Ethan recoiled. Yeah, they're soft," he stammered. "Perfect for sitting." At that moment, a subtle shift in the air made him notice something else. A faint, sweet scent, almost magnetic, and a warmth that seemed to radiate from Lyra as if the room itself was responding to her presence. Ethan's rational mind screamed, "She's just a guest. She's just a guest." Yet his heart, entirely uninvited, ignored logic. Hours passed with small disasters. A spilled cup of synthetic tea, Lyra accidentally rearranging his smart devices in a pattern that triggered a blinking emergency alert, and Ethan explaining, repeatedly and awkwardly, that no, humans do not normally use lasers to stir soup. The laughter that followed each incident gradually softened the tension between them, and the oddity of the situation became strangely comforting. By midnight, Lyra was perched on the armrest of the couch, observing him like a scientist measuring an unusually interesting variable. "You humans are delightfully predictable," she said, and Ethan, exhausted and drenched in equal parts sweat and spilled tea, muttered, "That's reassuring." She tilted her head, ears twitching, and smiled. "Yes, you amuse me." And somewhere deep in the back of his mind, Ethan realized that despite the chaos, despite the strangeness, despite the soft, compelling pull he couldn't explain, he didn't want her to leave. Not yet. Rain continued to drum on the windows. City lights shimmered like scattered stardust, and two utterly mismatched beings, one human, one alien, sat in a shared bubble of improbable companionship, unaware of the challenges, laughs, and awkward entanglements still to come. Ethan woke to the sound of his smart alarm buzzing in an offbeat rhythm that felt like it was laughing at him. He groaned, glanced at the clock, and realized Lyra was already awake, sitting cross-legged on the countertop, examining his collection of spice jars as if they were alien artifacts. Her long ears twitched in perfect synchrony with the soft hum of the refrigerator, and she hummed a melodic note that made the coffee machine sputter in protest. "Good morning," Ethan mumbled, rubbing his eyes, "and good morning to whatever this is." Lyra glanced at him with wide, unblinking eyes. "Morning rituals are inefficient," she said, tapping a jar of oregano with one slender finger. "You consume liquids and solids at arbitrary intervals. Fascinating." Ethan blinked. "Yeah, that's called breakfast. Some humans even do cereal with milk, sometimes live cereal." Lyra tilted her head. "Live cereal? Intriguing. Do they bite back?" Before Ethan could answer, she leaped down from the counter in a movement that was more glide than jump, landing without a sound on the floor. His apartment shook just slightly, like a subtle warning tremor. "Careful," he said, holding up a hand. "Gravity works differently for you than it does for me." Lyra giggled, a sound like wind chimes caught in a light storm. "I have adapted to multiple gravities. This one is tolerable." She sniffed the air and tilted her head toward him, and Ethan's stomach betrayed him with a flutter he didn't have time to analyze. By mid-morning, the chaos had escalated. Lyra's instincts, which Ethan still didn't understand fully, had begun to manifest in peculiar ways. She followed him around as he tried to work, her movements graceful but unpredictable. Every small human action he took seemed to trigger her curiosity, and occasionally her inexplicable bursts of energy. She tried to replicate his typing by waving her hands in the air, producing holographic letters that floated and collided with each other before settling randomly on his screen. "Your symbols are frustrating," she declared. "Why not communicate with light and color patterns?" Ethan stared at the glowing mess. "I don't think my boss would approve of that." Lyra's curiosity extended to the kitchen, where she discovered his microwave. She opened it, tilted her head, and pressed buttons experimentally. A frozen burrito expanded, rotated, and then popped out, hitting the ceiling before falling on Ethan's foot. He yelped, hopping on one leg. "Why does everything in this apartment try to attack me?" he shouted, waving the burrito like a makeshift weapon. Lyra blinked. "It does not attack you, it merely expresses its energy." Ethan stared. "Yeah, well, your energy is expressing itself on my foot." The afternoon brought a visit to the balcony, where Lyra insisted on observing atmospheric fluctuations and gravitational anomalies. She leaned over the railing, scanning the city with those sharp, glittering eyes. Your species' interactions with weather are limited, she mused. You rely on fabrics and coverings to survive liquid precipitation. Primitive, yet amusing. Ethan, dripping in rain from a failed attempt to follow her outside, muttered, "I'll take that as a compliment." She turned to him, ears twitching, and smiled. "Indeed, I like your persistence." Lunch was a disaster and a revelation. Lyra insisted on tasting every item Ethan prepared, sniffing each one, analyzing it, and then making small, incomprehensible adjustments. She touched spices to her long ears, muttered notes under her breath, and occasionally emitted a purring sound that caused the lights to flicker. Ethan ate cautiously, trying to figure out if the flavors were safe, if the reactions were normal, and whether he would survive sharing a meal with a being whose senses were hyper-advanced. "You humans are delightfully illogical," Lyra said, licking a spoon with an intensity that would have embarrassed a cat. Ethan coughed. "Thank you, I think." By late afternoon, the first truly mating season incident occurred. Lyra had discovered his small collection of indoor plants, and the moment her fingers brushed against a fern, a subtle hum filled the air. The scent she emitted, soft, floral, entirely irresistible, caused Ethan's pulse to spike in ways he could barely comprehend. He cleared his throat, tried to retreat, and accidentally knocked over a stack of his favorite books. "Okay, that's not normal," he muttered, blushing and wishing the floor would swallow him whole. Lyra looked at him with those gleaming eyes, noticing his reaction with curiosity rather than judgment. "Your physical responses are fascinating," she said. "They mirror the energy fluctuations I anticipated, yet amplified." Ethan stumbled backward, mumbling something about human biology being complicated and hoping she didn't notice how red his ears had become. Evening arrived with more small disasters. Lyra had activated his hollow entertainment system, causing a projection of the city skyline to shift and swirl around them in surreal patterns. She laughed, a soft, tinkling sound that made Ethan momentarily forget the lingering awkwardness. "You see," she said, "chaos and beauty coexist naturally. You humans attempt order, and yet it is amusing to watch your failures." Ethan chuckled nervously. "Yeah, well, at least we're consistent." By nightfall, they found themselves sitting on the couch, exhausted from a day that alternated between marvel and near catastrophe. Ethan had learned more about her species in 12 hours than he had about his own neighbors in 10 years. Lyra had discovered that humans were fragile, messy, and occasionally hilarious. Between the laughter, minor disasters, and absurd misunderstandings, a bond was forming, delicate, unpredictable, and undeniably real. As Ethan prepared to brew a cup of tea, a safer, less interactive option than breakfast had been, Lyra leaned back, her long ears brushing against the ceiling. "Tomorrow," she said softly, "I wish to explore your human sleeping rituals. They are curious." Ethan groaned, rubbing his temples but couldn't help smiling. "Oh, tomorrow's going to be even weirder, isn't it?" She nodded, eyes gleaming with amusement and anticipation. "I believe it will." And as the city lights shimmered against the rain-streaked windows, two beings, one human, one alien, settled into the beginning of a complicated, humorous, and strangely intimate coexistence, their worlds colliding in ways neither fully understood, but both found utterly compelling. Ethan awoke to the faint buzz of his apartment lights adjusting themselves to the morning glow, and immediately remembered. Lyra was already awake, pacing across the floor with the precision of someone mapping gravitational anomalies. Her long ears twitched as she hummed, a sound that made the walls vibrate slightly, though he'd grown accustomed to it. "Morning," he said cautiously, dragging himself out of bed. "And morning again to whatever this is." Lyra turned, eyes glinting with amusement. "Your humans persist in rituals of hygiene and nourishment. Intriguing. Shall we proceed?" Ethan groaned, rubbing his temples. Let's just get breakfast over with before anything else explodes, okay? She tilted her head and followed him to the kitchen, stepping over the puddles from her previous adventures, and Ethan found himself smiling despite the chaos. By mid-morning, her mating instincts had intensified, though she had learned to temper them enough to avoid catastrophic disasters. Mostly. She leaned over him at the hollow workstation, studying his work with intense focus, occasionally tapping the air to generate floating holographic diagrams that clashed in midair before settling. "Your methods," she said, "are inefficient but effective in a strange human way." Ethan chuckled, dodging a holographic burst of data. "Thanks, I think." Her laughter was soft, tinkling like a wind chime caught in a summer breeze, and for the first time Ethan felt he could breathe fully around her. The day escalated into a chaotic adventure when a stray patrol drone, scanning for unusual energy signatures, hovered outside his apartment window. Lyra stiffened, sensing the drone's interest in her pheromonal emissions, which, though diminished, were still detectable. Ethan panicked. "Okay, aliens, drones, how do I explain everything?" Lyra glanced at him, eyes sparkling with amusement. "You are unpredictable, I like it." She took control, extending her long fingers to manipulate the city's minor energy fields, causing the drone to misread the signals and drift harmlessly away. Ethan stared, jaw slack. You just hacked a drone with your ears." She blinked. "Not ears, energy sensors, but close enough." After the small crisis passed, they found themselves sitting on the couch, exhausted but exhilarated. Ethan had learned to anticipate some of her unpredictable behaviors, and more importantly, learned to relax in their presence rather than resist them. Humor had become their lifeline, diffusing tension when her instincts flared or when appliances malfunctioned. Lyra, in turn, had learned the subtle complexities of human reactions, how a smile could calm nerves, how sarcasm could communicate more than logic, and how trust could build in tiny increments. Lyra leaned toward him suddenly, long ears brushing the ceiling, and said, "Your human expressions are fascinating. You are capable of remarkable adaptation, and you amuse me endlessly." Ethan felt his heart thump uncontrollably. You mean that in a good way, right?" She tilted her head, ears twitching. "Yes, it is positive." He laughed nervously, realizing that her honesty, though blunt, was somehow comforting. The day continued with more gentle disasters. Lyra discovered Ethan's old robot vacuum, and in a misguided attempt to optimize it, accidentally caused it to chase him around the apartment like a tiny, gleaming predator. He yelped, slipping over a rug, and she laughed so hard that her ears quivered in delight. "You are agile for a primitive species," she said, trying to stifle a giggle. Ethan groaned, but he couldn't help smiling. For the first time in years, life felt unpredictable and alive in a way he hadn't experienced. As evening descended, they prepared a small dinner together. Lyra mimicked human cooking techniques, though she occasionally added unexpected ingredients that smelled faintly of alien flora. Ethan tasted cautiously, and surprisingly the flavors worked. She tilted her head, observing his reaction with curiosity. "You approve?" Ethan nodded. "Yeah, it's actually amazing. You might be dangerous in the kitchen, but worth it." She laughed, a soft, melodic sound that made the lights flicker. "Dangerous and amusing," she said. "A good combination." After dinner, they sat on the balcony, the city sprawling below like a glittering circuit board. Ethan realized how much he had changed. His routines were no longer rigid, his solitary habits had softened, and he had discovered the strange joy of navigating unpredictability. He looked at Lyra, who was watching the skyline with those piercing, expressive eyes, and thought about the absurdity that had brought them together. Rain, malfunctioning drones, spilled tea, holographic chaos. They had survived it all, laughing through the turbulence. Lyra leaned close, almost brushing his shoulder, and whispered, "Your species is fragile, but you adapt, you survive, and I find it compelling." Ethan swallowed hard, words failing him, and then managed a shaky, I like having you here. Even with all this chaos. She smiled, ears twitching like tiny sails catching the wind. "I like being here with you." The night deepened, and the city lights flickered in harmony with the hum of distant traffic and the occasional flash of neon advertisements. Ethan's apartment, once a place of predictable solitude, now thrummed with life, laughter, and the soft, magnetic energy of an alien presence that had reshaped him. Together, they had navigated misunderstanding, instinctual chaos, and a world that neither fully controlled. They had found equilibrium, a balance of humor, curiosity, and companionship. And as they settled side by side, shoulders brushing, eyes glinting with shared amusement, Ethan realized something profound. Life's unpredictability, its small disasters and absurdities, could be beautiful when shared with someone who embraced them as fully as he now did. Lyra, long ears brushing the ceiling and a playful smile on her face, reached for his hand, and he grasped it without hesitation. Their worlds, once alien to each other, had collided in the most improbable, chaotic, and utterly wonderful way. And in that collision, they had discovered connection, laughter, and perhaps the beginnings of something enduring. The rain continued outside, soft and insistent, but inside, amid flickering lights and holographic shadows, two beings, human and alien, had created a space where chaos, humor, and companionship coexisted perfectly. Ethan leaned back, relaxed in a way he hadn't known he could be, and for the first time he welcomed the unknown with open arms, ready for whatever adventures, absurdities, or small disasters might come next.